I think the challenge in India right now is while the PLI scheme will lead to gigafactories getting built, which should take about 2 to 3 years, and then it takes about 2 years to qualify the cells coming out of the gigafactory. Thereafter, if the ecosystem follows anode and cathode and separator electrolyte manufacturers into India, that also is a long qualification process. So when you look down at 2030 and they think India should have close to 100 gigawatt hours of capacity or requirement, that ecosystem for raw material will be still very small and just developing. And we might have even missed the boat in developing that ecosystem.
In the best interest of time, we can begin. So very happy to see the fraternity here, and as they keep joining in, we'll continue the conversation. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time out and joining in today. It's such a big privilege and a pleasure to reconnect with everyone, our distinguished panelists who are handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience that they bring in. And thank you to our distinguished audience for joining us. We've received over 250 registrations, most of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are our members and repeat visitors to our webinars, which is very encouraging and motivates us to provide high levels of dialogue to the online channels as well. And for those of you who are new with us today, the BlueCircle is an exclusive community and ecosystem which is curated for business leaders currently across 6 sectors, which are e-mobility, energy, real estate, healthcare, aerospace and defense, and logistics. And very soon, we will be adding 18 new sector communities to our platform to form the BlueCircle 24. We also present socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. And in response to the COVID challenge, the BlueCircle has also accentuated its digital presence. One of the many modes we employ is our weekly webinar series in our digital publication. And in addition to this, and you'll be happy to know that we very recently launched the first version of the BlueCircle app, which is curated for leaders, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for senior leaders, a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with each other, house high-quality curated content, and provide access to business opportunities across our core sectors. So those leaders who are interested, please do join us. I will share the link to the app in the chat section, and we'll also soon send out invitations to our new guests post the webinars. And also thankful to thousands of leaders who've joined the platform already and all the members who are joining in today. Today, as part of our Make in India series, we're privileged to have big minds and leading thinkers of the industry to join in for our e-mobility community's discussion. The topic is EV indigenization, aligning public policy, market demand, and industry investment. In the best interest of time, I will just briefly mention the names and designations of our panelists. We have with us Mr. Abhishek Saxena, Public Policy Expert, NITI Aayog, Dr. Deb Mukherji, Managing Director, Omega Seiki, Mr. Sheetal Bahl, Partner, growX Ventures, Mr. Vikram Handa, Founder and Managing Director, Epsilon Advanced Materials, and our Chair and Moderator for this session is Mr. Ashish Kulkarni, Associate Partner, Ernst & Young. Thank you very much, sirs. It's an absolute pleasure. And I now request Mr. Kulkarni to please chair and moderate the session.
Thank you. Thank you, Siddharth, and a warm welcome to everyone on this particular panel, my dear panelists, as well as all the members who are listening to us, and for having taken time out of your busy schedule for this and making it for this panel session. And yeah, in basically what we want to, and it's a very interesting topic. We are at the what I would say as the real it's a real point, inflection point when it comes to this particular e-mobility and EV related the ongoing discussion is all around how to bring in the indigenization manufacturing and getting the cost down so that the penetration goes to a large extent. Even in the states have come come out with their own policies, or everyone is ready to give incentives directly to the customers. But at the same time, we are hitting this inflection point has got two aspects to it when it comes to providing the backbone of the manufacturing as well as incentive structures to those who are creating the ecosystem. I think these are the two main things which need to play out, and we are looking at we are going to talk about it in our panelist with our panelists. And today, one of the key things is that there is because of the Paris Agreement, because of the IPCC report, we do recognize, and every customer recognizes the choice which he or she has in going through that preferential preference of their own to whether to choose EV or not. And many from what we have seen within EY, and we have conducted a large survey across the globe as well as within India on the customer preferences. And one of the key things that has come out from those is that the customers more and more prefer green or green choices, and they prefer environment-friendly choices, and that is also including electric vehicles. And there is lots to happen in the policy space, the regulatory space. There is lots to happen on the financing angle of EVs and EV manufacturers, as well as what are the kind of incentive structures which are needed, and the timing at which all of the points need to converge, so that you have a successful program of EV penetration in India. And there are several countries looking at us. Several from the inside view, the customers are looking at what government is going to do, and from an external factor, there are several countries which are looking at India on how this plays out over here. Because at the end of the day, there are several kinds of lessons which we as India also provide for the rest of the world. And having been with several programs which are several countries which are preparing their roadmaps on indigenization as well as EV penetration, they all look up to India as to what would pan out here. So it is at a stage where we need to take some decisions and be realistic also on the aspect of how much can be done in India and with what time frame. There's nothing that we cannot achieve, but yes, we have to be realistic in the sense that there is a push towards electric vehicles, and what is that can be made in India, and what is that we will have to in the short run we'll have to although importing, we will have to do that and then create an ecosystem which will then match the demand coming in from the customers. So I'll stop at that, and I would like to invite Mr. Handa to speak about his journey into the space and what he thinks about and what to think about the schemes which India has launched, including the PLI scheme, and what you think about going forward and how this entire ecosystem could come into play, and what does from a perspective of entrepreneur, and what is that you look into with the government, and then we will take it to other panelists. But over to you, Vikram, and very well. First of all, very warm welcome to this panel, and then please go ahead with your viewpoints. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ashish, and thank you to BlueCircle for organizing this wonderful webinar, and I hope everybody finds it interesting. So, in my opinion, I think the government has been working the last 4 or 5 years on trying to draft a roadmap and policies to support EV adoption in India. And I think they've done a very good job with coming out with this PLI scheme, which is hopefully going to lead to much more EV adoption. We already see that on the two-wheeler, three-wheeler side and the public transport side. And I think that's the low-hanging fruit in India, which we will see convert from ICE into EVs. And the PLI scheme talks about, and in the right way, it talks about certain amount of localization day one, and about 25% localization day one, and about 60% of localization within 5 years to get this benefit. I think it's well drafted in the sense to attract investment into the raw material ecosystem as well, so that this industry can really flourish and develop independently, and eventually these subsidies can go away and it can be self-reliant. We ourselves are manufacturing graphite anodes in India and supplying them started the qualification process to supply to cell companies. And we think it will, in about 2 years, we will start catering to the demand for cell companies outside India. Our market is definitely Europe and North America, because that's where we see the big boom happening right now, and a lot of gigafactories coming up and demand for these kind of materials. I think the challenge in India right now is while the PLI scheme will lead to gigafactories getting built, which should take about 2 to 3 years, and then it takes about 2 years to qualify the cells coming out of the gigafactory. Thereafter, if the ecosystem follows anode and cathode and separator electrolyte manufacturers into India, that also is a long qualification process. So when you look down at 2030 and they think India should have close to 100 gigawatt hours of capacity or requirement, that ecosystem for raw material will be still very small and just developing. And we might have even missed the boat in developing that ecosystem. So today, we are the only company in India that is providing a localized component in the cell chemistry. All other components need to be imported, right? But I think there's a great opportunity for India to develop this ecosystem. I think it's about bringing awareness, and we are conversing with state governments to say that you need to incentivize this industry. And in an industry like mine, while raw material is important, the biggest cost structure is actually energy. And today, it's very important that you manufacture EVs and cells responsibly. So we have to use solar and wind power to convert battery minerals into battery materials. And I think you have states like Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Andhra, Karnataka, Maharashtra that are very pro-industry and looking at attracting investments as well. So I think this is where policy needs to be a little fine-tuned, where if you were to incentivize making India into an export hub to manufacture these battery materials, and in 5 or 6 years, remove this subsidy slowly so that this industry also develops while gigafactories come up in India. So I think that's what needs to be done. India is very rich in graphite and manganese. And I think those are two components that can be made in India and cater to global demands. And India as a country is very well knowledgeable, and we know how to do chemical processing. So I think, and mining and mineral processing. So I think that will be again a strength of India. And when we look at ex-China solutions that can bring these products to the world, I think definitely India is in the forefront like it is in other industries and can cater to global demand. These industries are not easy to develop in Europe and North America. So there are challenges, no matter how much localization other countries want to do, it is challenging. So while this raw material ecosystem needs to develop, I think a lot more money needs to go into R&D as well. And government under DSIR needs to allocate funds for R&D in the EV ecosystem so that good technologies come out of India, and we are not always 3 or 4 years behind what is happening in North America or Europe. And we see a lot of VC funding going in those countries, but unfortunately not enough in India. So I think investment into R&D and some kind of benefits for developing the raw material ecosystem, not necessarily a PLI scheme, but in some other way, so that we can attract investment and technology into India.
Sure, thanks, Vikram. I think 2 main points I would like to add to it is that, recently we saw a policy amendment on the electricity side of things that, the third-party sale by renewables they've made it more feasible, and open access is to be provided, to everyone. So the the fact of the matter is that you will have pockets where renewable energy can be generated in India, but at the same time, the end use can be anywhere in India, and the enablement of that to happen without any extra additional cost or surcharges is something that India is definitely looking at. So that part of responsibly converting these raw materials into battery materials is something that's definitely been looked at. So that is one point I wanted to touch. And second is on the aspect of financing, which you said. Definitely, I think from a perspective of this entire ecosystem to come up, I think it requires domestic funding, then it requires a set of incentives from the government, but there is also a lot of push from the international community also that needs to happen. So once the incentive structures are there, and then the domestic equity is already in place, I think the VCs as well as the mezzanine kind of funds as well as the other structures could be worked into. And there has to be some innovation also from the perspective of creating a fund structure in which every person has a risk adjusted return parameter could be looked into from a perspective of a NIIF or a equivalent body, institutional body. That is something that I would leave Abhishek to Abhishek and Siddharth to assimilate, and then basically we could look into taking that aspect as well. Third aspect is also on the state incentives. On each state could come up with some part of the ecosystem rather than everyone trying to do everything. We could have the ecosystem very much focused on who can do what. The mineral-rich states can actually do a lot of incentives on actually exploiting the minerals, and there could be some states only looking at manufacturing, some states looking at or the ecosystem itself. We could divide into several states, and those states can take it forward from there. So these are all just thoughts, but you were raising your hand, so yeah.
Ashish, very good point. To add to that, what China has actually built in this ecosystem is that they have built huge processing power capacity. They don't really necessarily have all minerals. India also doesn't have all minerals, but they've built that processing capacity, which today gives them an edge in manufacturing, scaling up this industry.
Correct.
So the challenge is that a lot of money needs to go into this industry, and it takes time to build this capacity.
Yeah.
In India, we are talking about putting 5,000 crores to build 100,000 ton capacity. 100,000 ton capacity caters to 100 gigawatt hours in 2030. But all other allied industries for raw material needs such investments, need such and technology coming into India, right? So I think this is where the US has put these minerals on a critical material list, which has now identified that these 7 or 8 minerals are important for the economy, and that has led to a lot of funding coming into that space.
Sure.
So some way this needs to get identified, and government needs to put private and public money into this space, because it takes time to develop a mine. It takes time to set up these greenfield projects in India, but definitely the move of giving green power to these industries and giving access to that is a huge advantage for the raw material ecosystem.
Sure. Thanks, Vikram. I'll come back to you again. Moving on to Dr. Mukherji, your perspectives on the same subject, and since you're also into this business of the components and the other part of the ecosystem, which are those 3 or 4 very important components, and how the ecosystem is developing around EVs? If you would like to touch upon that, and any kind of viewpoints on what actually needs to happen to take this dream into reality is something which we would like to hear from you.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you very much, first of all, BlueCircle, for having me in the panel. It's a great opportunity to interact with the fellow panelists who are very experienced. They're own subjects and industries. As far as, my view is concerned, obviously we do see a lot of interest from various stakeholders, primarily government. Government is the biggest driver to this whole transition from IC to EV today. And they are obviously come up with various incentives on the supply side as well as the demand side. So that is something which is great, and it is very good for the industry, because an industry of this size and scale that the government is talking about cannot happen and in the short time frame. As Vikram mentioned, that this is right. These kind of value chains, the supply chain takes decades to develop. The cell manufacturing, the whole raw material supplies, etc., etc. And also, technology keeps evolving rapidly, as we are seeing now. The cathode materials, the electrolytes, and the separator, etc. There is a huge amount of research that is happening. So it's not something that can be done in a short span of time. Having said that, I'm very excited to see the government a consistent push towards this whole electrification. The government, and particularly Honorable Minister, has been extremely, focused on this. And the NITI Aayog document, etc., they are talking about 80% of electrification in two-wheelers, three-wheelers by 2030. It is hugely ambitious. I don't know whether this will happen or not. We have to see how all the stakeholders come together, but certainly it is a big driver. Secondly, I do see the opportunity on the, let's talk about the opportunity side. I divide the opportunities into 4 sectors or segments. One is obviously the economic opportunity. The last mile on the user side, the cost of running these vehicles is a fraction of what we spend on the IC engine. The whole fuel import bill of India will or should go drastically down on the fuel side. And also a big economic opportunity is for the component side. I do see that globally, automotive is something like $10 trillion industry, and Indian auto industry, if you talk about numbers, we are number 4 in car manufacturing, number 1 in two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and also the tractors. But you see in terms of exports, it's a minuscule of the whole global, market. Just about 1% or 1.5%, whatever. We have a $50 billion auto components industry in India. So I do see that this is a great opportunity for the component industry to become a global supplier of components. Critical components, what you asked me, I think obviously we all talk about the battery and the powertrain and the electronics. This is something the capability has to be, enhanced. The capability up to a certain level is there. Even the IC engine uses a lot of motors, but the motors for the EV have to be designed, to suit the EV. Battery and cell is, of course, a different ball game altogether. But the electronics part is also quite significant in the modern cars. I think one of your EVI study shows about 50% of the cost of car is going to be electronics, and all the automation, AI, etc., that goes inside. So, in short, it is a huge economic opportunity. Numbers are talked about something like 500 billion or something. I really don't know. Apart from that, there is a technological opportunity to develop these alternate materials, come up with more efficient vehicles, and not just pick up any standard motor and fit it into, take out the engine, take out the gearbox and make it a sort of a retrofit kind of a thing. I think the Indian industry, we have to develop our own products. So we have to really become confident, courageous. And that is where, I really admire something what Ola is doing, leave aside the access to money that he has, but, it takes courage to set up something like what he's doing. So I think that's a great opportunity again for Indian industry, and work with various institutions, academics. IIT Madras is doing a phenomenal job, and come together and bring these products from incubation into industry. That takes a leap. That is where I think a lot of this did not happen in the IC age, and this is an opportunity where we could be, we have a huge opportunity here. And third part I would say is the social opportunity. It is a movement as I see. The EV is a movement. It is a great enabler of social entrepreneurship. It brings in the application like street cards or the food cards, etc. E-rickshaws. These can generate a huge amount of jobs and bring a lot of social change. Even in the rural areas, there is a government scheme where they have come up with the street, street vendor enabling scheme. So a lot of money is there, and something has to enable it. The problem is that government can only do or come up with the schemes or come up with the money, but the enabler has to be the industry, and come up with the right product, and put the technology into the product, and that is what is disruption about, according to me. The real disruption is when you have the bottom of the pyramid using your products and services, and at a economical cost. That is the disruption. And fourth and last is obviously the environmental opportunity to do something about the environment. We face it, we talk about it, but only we can do it, because we are obviously responsible for this deterioration of environment. In Delhi, every winters we see the smog and the whole, the AQI going up to 400 or whatever. I think this is a time to do something about it, and this is EV is one of the solutions that we have, to cut down on that area, because data shows almost 60% or probably more pollution is coming from the vehicles on the road. So I think these are in a way, these are the opportunities in this whole disruption that we are seeing. The enablers today is a government, and obviously the legislation, etc., the various rules and regulations that are coming in place, and the economic side of it looks good. Obviously, the stakeholders from the industry, the charging, government, finance companies, and academics, I think they all have to come together, to make it happen, and at a scale where the government is, willing it to go, and government has that vision to do. I think it is doable. We have seen it happening in solar. We saw it happening in telecom. So I think this is something that if we all come together and set all the links of the chain, then it is doable. I mean, that's my view.
Thank you, Dr. Mukherji, and I think this is one of the key important things which you have brought about is also, while we talk about financing, while we talk about aspects of indigenization and everyone coming in together, you also brought out the importance of social opportunity. And also one of the key things which you mentioned is also in the skill development. I think we usually miss out on that aspect. R&D was also covered by Vikram, but this is a very important point of bringing in that skill development for various things. So there is the entire aspect of going into production processes, but also on the design aspects of it. So that we are fully covered in that sense, that if the skill gets developed, that would mean that there is a lot of opportunities created, and the social inclusion, and that opportunity need not be missed, which was missed earlier in several other cases. Thank you so much for bringing that point, and definitely well noted. I would now invite Sheetal, who has been in the VC space, and from his perspective what he sees. And I think there have been pointers which both Vikram and Dr. Mukherji has already covered, but from your perspective, how you see this entire ecosystem panning out, and what is that change or 3-4 changes which you would see that from the other markets as well, what would be able to enable this ecosystem to come into play? Over to you, Sheetal.
Thanks, Ashish, and thanks, BlueCircle, for having me here. So I'm going to present, a fairly different narrative from what you've heard so far, which has been a lot more technical. I'm going to take a high-level view of the industry from an investment perspective. Just to set context about, why I'm familiar with this and, who we are. So growX is a very early stage fund. We invest in B2B companies and emerging technologies. We've been tracking the EV space since 2017. In 19, we decided to take a position. We ran an accelerator program as part of, the last couple of years. You've seen over 200 companies in the EV space in India. We took 2 pre-seeds bet. Those are mature, and since they followed on, one is developing a battery swapping network for 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers, and the other is developing LCVs, e-LCVs. For which there is now, which is one of the earliest vehicle segments which is taking off in the EV space in India. So we're amongst the few funds who've taken 2 bets in EVs already, and continue to look at the space actively. So let me share what the general investor perspective is. So far, there are seed stage funds like ours who've taken some bets. Bunch have taken 1. We have one of the few which have taken 2, like I said. But beyond that, which is the next stage, which is Series A bets, there have been negligible bets. So outside the few big ones like Ola Electric, Hero Electric, recently Magenta, there have just been no meaningful investments in the electric space at all. We were thinking this would happen in 20, but maybe COVID slowed down things. We were thinking this would happen in 21, but it just doesn't seem to be happening. And we've talked to a lot of later stage VCs to sort of understand this why. Later stage VCs in India are just not convinced that we are at the tipping point of EVs yet in India, right? So they believe that just the time has not come at all, right? And investors don't want to get early into a space lest their companies run out of cash, right? So they typically want to get in just at the right time when a company is beginning to, industry is beginning to mature. So they want to be early enough, but not too early. So why do investors believe this, right? Investors believe this because they believe that the private sector alone in India cannot tip this over. There might be, right now, there might be one potential exception to this, which is Ola Electric is launching scooters, which could actually bring 2-wheelers into the, zeitgeist of the public. And they might be the tipping point, which, starts making EVs go mainstream. But that's also not obvious. Generally, the belief amongst the investment community is that the government needs to have meaningful participation in this to make this happen. Now, the government intent over the last few years has been very positive, and they've talked about a whole bunch of things they've introduced. There was phase 1, there's phase 2, there's now PLI, etc. But there has been a gap between thoughts and policy on paper and action. There's just not enough happening from the government side, and this, we believe, is imperative to the industry taking off in India, right? So I'll give you an example, and Ashish briefly talked about around charging last time around. In China, 40% of the entire charging infrastructure belongs to the government, and they set up most of it before the private players start coming in. So the initial couple of years of the entire infrastructure being set up was under the government. Once the sort of model was proven, then it moved to private sector coming in. We think the same is required. The government needs to make do a lot more to make this happen right now, as opposed to later. I'm also, going to present one other thought on this. I was asking my co-panelists earlier that is this like a completely pro-indigenization view here? And because I actually have a contrarian view, which is that I'm not even sure why indigenization is important at this point, right? So what's the government's objective at this point? Is it to create a new domestic industry, or is it to promote EV adoption? It seems like from the way they're putting it out that it's a combination of both, but with far more emphasis on the former, which is creating a new industry, right? I would argue that actually at this point, it's more important to create the industry, do what is right to reduce move towards cleaner energy, towards creating just a much better environment, reducing pollution, doing our bit for climate change, etc., and then following that on with indigenization, right? That there should not be any constraints put on imports, and if that's the way to go faster, then that should be done, right? So is indigenization important? Absolutely, we do want to create an industry out of it. But there have been many industries in India which have got created on the back of foreign players coming into India. Look at e-com, while Flipkart is there, but Amazon later became competitors. Look at Ola. Ola came in, but Uber set the precedents there. Look at other industries, like, for example, just look at things like social media, right? There are now lots of social media in India, Indian companies, but they got created on the back of the Facebooks and Instagrams and WhatsApp coming into India. So it is not necessary to create an industry in India and preclude and exclude foreign investment or foreign participation in this. So I'm also just and I don't know what my co-panelists think, but I'm also questioning the importance or the imperative for indigenization at this point, and saying maybe there's another way to look at it and say, hey, let this industry get created, and at the same time, put in long-term initiatives. So PLI is a good example, right? PLI will probably play out in 5 years. But if you want stuff to go electric today, then maybe we don't need to do, focus on the indigenization. So that's some alternative views from the investor industry. I'm happy to take this into further discussion later and answer Q&A later. Ashish, back to you.
Sure, Sheetal, I think interesting take. The only point is that, this is, I mean, you could start from the place of the doing good for the environment and doing the right thing for the people of this country, and then move into indigenization. I think the place and time has come into play with the perspective of several different things, right? So we cannot, I mean, we are at a stage wherein we cannot compare this particular time of ours with anything in the past or as well. The priorities of the government are quite very it's torn apart because of the COVID situation. Because there is a lot of resources which were also spent during that which was kept for certain things. Then it was diverted. Then there are several things coming into play. There is also the federal and state structure, right? We have to deal with, which is not there in probably in different countries. So there is this always a balance in which we need to take in everything at the same time. So while the government or the center wants to do everything right in most of the places, I think the more I wouldn't say that it's, again, my personal view and perspective, that it may be a prudent way that it can segregate all that is need to be needed and give leadership positions to several other states, so that they can do some bits and parts in different stages, so that everything comes into the place at the same time. And while I agree with you that the financing is the backbone of this particular activity to take in, and for the industry to develop, and you gave very good examples of some of the industries moving with absolute 100% FDI backed. Similarly, for these, I think some of the things we should do quite why not? I mean, have road shows probably that that bring in specific investment for specific things. That those are the things. I think there are plans. We'll listen to it, and there are a lot of things which we have already spoken, and this is an opportune time to bring in Abhishek. I think he has got a lot of things to say, and he has got a lot of ideas, and I think it would be good to see and hear from his perspective what the government is thinking. Over to you, Abhishek.
Thank you so much, Ashish. Thank you so much. So I think, first of all, let me at the onset thank the BlueCircle for inviting me for this enlightening discussion, and at the same time, a very thanks to all the esteemed panelists out here. I've got very good pointers from you guys, and it's a very enriching and a learning experience for me also, on understanding what are the pain points across different segments of the industry and what are different stakeholders thinking on this. See, I think, let me just start with why are we discussing this topic, and why is the topic so close to government's heart, and why we are looking at indigenization at the first place. And as my last panelist has raised some very valid points on this, let me just at the onset address those points to start with. So the first idea is, to understand where we are at this point of time in terms of automobile industry. It's very important to understand that automobile industry gives employment to somewhere close to around 3 crores people directly and indirectly across the value chain. That is what I'm talking about. And it contributes nearly 7% of our GDP and around 49% of the manufacturing. So it's a huge mammoth elephant that we are talking about, that we're dealing with at this point of time. Very important to understand this point, before we get into the EV debate of it. So there's an industry which is already set up. It is one of the world's best, not the best, but probably one of the world's best industry that we have been able to build upon in the recent decades. Provides huge employment to a large workforce of it. So, in this backdrop, if we are moving to EVs, so it is very important to understand that EVs across the world have been used as a policy lever for two gains primarily. So one is the EVs are used as a policy for environmental gains, and other is the EVs have been used as a policy for industrial gains. The idea that has happened is, in the Western countries, the discourse has moved around, using EVs as a tool for environmental gains. But that is not something what China did. And we all agree with that concept, that China used this EV policy as a lever towards industrial policy rather than an environmental policy. So it is important to understand why they did that, and why Western world is actually looking at, and what are the repercussions with that. Now, to understand, let me also bring in another perspective on how the Indian automobile space is actually stacked up, and how is it different from the Western world. Western world has a lot of dependence on the car, the passenger vehicle segment that we are talking about. It is largely dependent on that sector. It has some amount of buses that come into it, but that's largely a homogeneous set of a sector that we are talking about. India, on the contrary, is very disparate. It has a lot of heterogeneity. So under Motor Vehicle Act, there are more than 20-25 categories of vehicle, but largely, if we talk about, there are 4 segments that we are talking about. So the first is two-wheeler, then is three-wheeler, then we are talking about passenger vehicles, and there are commercial vehicles. So which is passenger vehicle is equivalent to your cars and your light motor vehicles. And you have commercial vehicle, which is buses and trucks. Now, if you look at how this segment is stacked up and how our annual sales actually move, the 75 to 80% of our total sales of vehicles is in the two-wheeler segment. 6 to 7% is in the three-wheeler segment, and you have 15% only in the car segment. So a large space of our automobile space is in the two-wheeler. Now, as and when we move towards EVs, and it'll be interesting to understand, will our EV adoption follow the same trajectory as in the Western countries, or will it follow a very different trend? See, our understanding and our idea is that since our vehicle space is largely dominated by two-wheelers, so once we reach that inflection point, and one of the panelists has talked about that we are not there yet. So the idea is, once we reach that inflection point, the growth will be exponential, and the slope will be very high. Now, why I say that is, in case of two-wheelers, is because two-wheelers is a slightly simpler product than a car. It has lesser amount of power electronics involved, and it's a very easy product to manufacture, design, and sell. And once the economies, and it probably has a very big advantage of economies of scale also. You're selling more than 2 crore two-wheelers on the Indian market every year. So that's a huge number that we are talking about. So the idea and the understanding is that once we have that inflection point at the horizon, the adoption would be huge and it will be very steep. Something like we saw in the case of smartphones and other rapid technologies that we have adopted in the recent past. So the idea is once we let go of the domestic industry, so we say that we start with a EV as a policy tool for environmental gains only. So in that case, so what happens is we are not able to capitalize on the manufacturing and the gains associated with it, which includes employment, which includes GDP growth, which includes your manufacturing growth and the cascading impacts on that. And what also happens is once that EV market starts to get into the IC market, we are losing employment on everyday basis. So that is the idea that that the environmental policy lever for India would not, the use of environmental policy lever for EVs alone would not make sense. The Make in India initiative has to go hand in hand with that. So and the reasons I have listed that in my points that I raised earlier. So this is regarding the indigenization point, and I'll be happy to take more questions on why indigenization makes much more sense and how a market is different. Let me just raise upon some of the very good points my other panelists have raised. So I think that it is very important that India focuses on R&D. I think the couple of impediments that I see in EV adoption in India is one of the big factors is R&D. There are a lot of issues like charging infrastructure. There are issues like financing, but to my mind, the top issue that comes to EV adoption in India is availability of good quality products. That is a biggest impediment in EV adoption that we are seeing at this point of time. And even if we compare it to the higher price range of EVs, I'm not very worried about that, because with the scale and size that India offers, it is bound to come down, and it is bound to come down rapidly. So I think this is one area that the R&D ecosystem that has to be built up. And one of the panelists actually mentioned about how it is the EVs are actually power electronics driven, and there is a lot of electronics that is already there. I was just going through a paper by Professor Ajit Ranade. He's a NYC professor on macroeconomics, and he's very well enlisted on how we have actually, automobile is not a automobile industry per se. It's more of an IT industry. So the more than 50% value addition in a car is from the IT and IT components at this point of time, even in a internal combustion engine vehicle that we are talking about. And the story in in electric vehicle goes much beyond. And all of you will agree with me that it is more of a game of power electronics than an traditional automobile that we understand in the electric vehicle space. And that is why we've seen a lot of attraction from companies like Foxconn and Apple and Xiaomi moving into the electric vehicle space, because the vehicle is comparable to more to a phone than to a traditional automobile that we see on today's road. So that is one idea that R&D that we need to focus upon. The charging infrastructure, I think valid concerns have been raised, and I think there have been a lot of discussions around who should move first in the charging infrastructure. Should it be government? Should it be private sector? See, my idea is it cannot be a wholly government-driven scenario in India. And to give you a perspective, I think it is very important to understand that the charging infrastructure has to grow hand in hand with the vehicle adoption. It cannot be the model of China or probably states like California and US, where you have a charging infrastructure that is already set up and you're waiting for the vehicles to come in. Now, why I say that and why I make that broad assumption is because with the heterogeneous space of vehicle categories in India, which is two-wheelers, three-wheelers, cars and buses, there will be a mix of charging infrastructure that needs to come up, and it will not be very similar to what we've seen in other parts of the world, because you have models like battery swapping coming up, you have models like fast charging coming up. Give you a perspective on how this will make sense is, India has somewhere around close to 20 lakh electric rickshaws running on the Indian roads. Howsoever bad may be the quality, and we can discuss on the quality and the other issues of that, but they are somewhere getting charged. Now, all of us will agree that we've not seen a lot of charging stations in our site. How are they happening? So they are essentially happening through a model called battery swapping. So that is how it happens. And when we are seeing EV adoption, and the first EV adoption would happen in the commercial EV segment, so which is like the delivery guys, Zomato, Swiggy's, Ubers, and other commercial vehicles. So it will be used for the commercial space. So our traditional charging might not make very good sense for them, and battery swapping may be a probable option for them. So the idea is that it doesn't make sense for us to create any of the dead infrastructure. Why I say that dead? Because the usability of charging infrastructure across the world has been questioned, and said that, okay, we are not getting enough usage of that charging infrastructure. So the idea is, let's go hand in hand, and I think there has to be involvement from both ends, from private sector, from public sector, and I think let's make it a kind of a social movement where we shift from the traditional gas guzzling cars to electric vehicles with the initiative of public and private sector both. Some very good points raised by panelists on critical minerals and following a state specific strategy for development of different components or subcomponents of electric, rather than all going for one. I think these are very good suggestions, and I really appreciate that. Some very good points raised by that. So I'll end my initial note on that. And if you have any questions for me, I'll be more than happy to answer.
No, thanks, Abhishek. I think very relevant points. And on the R&D infrastructure and R&D things, that's absolutely something that we need to bring in. And, several of the aspects of, how we are looking at other countries, I think that will not happen. Even if you take charging infrastructure, it is a new model that's developing, and even if you take the penetration of, and you rightly said that two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, there are different stages of inflection points and different stages of ecosystem development for these. I think the aspect of this aspect is very important for India, taking into consideration what is actually needed for 3/4 of our countries. Probably it's two-wheelers and three-wheelers that need EV adoption, and then the bringing in the mandates for fleets probably to electrify first. So I think that is something which will be required. And also on the charging infrastructure side, while I agree with Sheetal that bringing in that 40% initial push drive, I mean that's happening from the perspective of the division of the 10,000 crores, which is in FAME, was also like we had only 1,000 for charging infrastructure, thinking that there will be further push which will come in from the private sector. That is something which we're not seeing. That needs some thought process and revision. Like what we do is we also are very good in having the policies in place. I think the review of those policies every 3-4 things. I mean now it's happening. I am seeing a lot of reviews happening across all the other programs. So I think there is a cognizance of the fact that this needs to be changed and tweaked at every point in time. And those are aspects that definitely you have touched upon all aspects, and bringing in those elements. I would allow allow another 5 minutes at up to 5 o'clock for any of the panelists. I have any of the questions to Abhishek, and then basically we can have a discussion for the next 5 minutes, and then I have some questions for the next 15 minutes from the audience already. there are certain that we could take it up after 5-10 minutes, but allowing my co-panelists to ask each other why only Abhishek, but Abhishek could also ask Vikram or Dr. Mukherji, what can you take away from this also? So anything on that front?
Yeah, if you allow me, I would like to bring out a point to Abhishek and maybe other my co-panelists as well. You see, one advantage or one difference that we are seeing here, and Sheetal brought out a perspective from the investor side, is compared to the IC industry. This industry is attracting a lot of attention. I'm not talking of US and all, or Europe, but here as well. Take the case of, if you see the data last 20 years, the IPOs or the fundraise by the traditional auto component companies, except 2 IPOs, which were, 1,000 crore, the rest of all were, 100 crore, the small and mid segment. Whereas it's very encouraging to see somebody like Sona's Comstar comes and gets valued at 3 billion. And I'm not talking about service companies, the Swiggy's or Zomato's, who are actually the users. I'm talking about the hardcore manufacturing industry. And this is something encouraging. And I would think, the investors to take a hard look at this, a company doing 2,000 crore sales gets valued at 22,000 crores. So there is something in there, I'm sure. Related to this, I would like to ask Abhishek, the big problem we face on the ground as vehicle makers is on the demand side, the financing. And why is not government coming out with some push on that side? Because anyway, 70% of the banks are state-owned. Why are the banks not coming in and financing? And, the private lenders or the NBFCs or loan company, the financing companies, they charge, something like 20-22%. How can a guy who is earning 1,000 rupees a day can afford that, a three-wheeler? I'm talking in the context of three-wheeler and even two-wheeler. So why is not that being looked at? So there's something, something to sort of mull about. So what's your take on this?
Sure. Dr. Mukherji, thank you for your question. And I think I empathize with this point. And I think, I think a point was raised around the flexibility. And I think Ashish mentioned it about the flexibility and the review of our government schemes. See, I think it's no hidden secret from anybody that the political economy of India and the public policy moves in a much slower pace, and it's not very agile to begin with to the changes. To give you a context of this, the recent amendments to the FAME, where the incentives were increased, the tendering by EESL was proposed for three-wheelers and buses. Took more than a year for me. So that was something that I was working on for a long period of time. Dr. Mukherji, I completely agree with your point. That is the biggest impediment we are talking about. And, I think somebody from the corporate world made a point that India is a market where you cannot sell a 300 rupee product, which is to be used monthly to anyone. But you can sell a 10 rupee product every day to consumers. So India is that price sensitive, and the electric vehicle dynamics are such that your initial upfront price is much higher, and operating price is much lower. So until and unless your cost of finance actually comes down, and you were mentioning a very conservative figure of 20-22%. I've got ground reports saying that the funds from NBFCs are flowing for as high as 30-35% for three-wheelers. This is the state of affairs. The idea is, we are in the process of coming out with something which solves this problem. there are couple of issues, within different institutions and within different stakeholders in the government. We are trying to get it resolved. The idea is that, and I think people would remember that in before 90s, if you look at the cost, the financing for automobiles, two-wheelers was very difficult. And there were some mechanisms that were put in place to actually ease that out. We are trying to learn from that experience. We are trying to build in new experiences. We have got very good proposals from intergovernmental bodies like World Bank, and we are working with all the state lenders to actually solve this problem. But I am completely on board with you on this, that this needs to be solved at priority. This has to be the priority one area for any stakeholders, because until unless we try to bring down the cost of finance with the cost sensitive market and with the lower purchasing power, let's be realistic around it. 70% of India still is under $2 per day. So that's not a very huge sign. We might have 25 crore two-wheelers running on Indian roads, but a large part of that segment is very cost sensitive. And once you load a higher fee, which is the upfront fee of electric vehicles, on top of it, you don't have easy access to finance. That actually, is not a very sweetened deal, to put it very mildly. So I think that should be the priority one. We are working on it. We'll soon see something on this front. We are very cognizant of this fact. I think I'll not be able to speak much more on that, but hopefully we'll see soon some action on this.
Thank you, Abhishek. Good to hear that.
Any one more question between anyone, or any question to me? That's also fine. But yeah, one more question between us, and then we'll move on to the audience questions. Okay, I think we'll move to the audience questions. So one of the key questions is, I believe, when will the PLI tenders be announced? So I think that question, Abhishek, you want to take on it? You can give some broad timelines.
It's under consideration as of now. So Department of Heavy Industries and along with NITI Aayog is working very aggressively on that. I won't be able to give you an exact date on that, but soon you'll see some.
Sure. And yeah, I think most of the questions on the how to improve government policies to promote, and how India is planning to break the dependency on China, I think most of these are covered. One of the key questions also was basically from the perspective of yeah, so we do have a lot of older buildings, and this is very much concentrated on charging infrastructure. We do have several policies and regulations for new infrastructure created to have charging stations, but something to do with the older buildings and older aspects where we need to bring in, and these are all again city related, admin related, wherein the ULBs will have to take the lead on, but is there any guidance for them, or that could enable these to happen? So
Right. Thank you, Ashish, for that question. I think you briefly touched upon, and I think I'll just talk about India's dependency on China and look at how actually is that so much of a concern at this point of time, and India's dependency on any of the geopolitical region. I'll not be specific to China. It can be Congo. It can be ABC Triangle in Southern America that we are talking about. Let's I'll just briefly touch upon that point. See, the idea is lithium ion is the chemistry of the day. It has emerged as undisputed leader, and it is one of the best chemistries for electric vehicles that we are talking about. But I think everybody agrees with me with this fact that if we talk about, let's say, 2070 sitting in 2020, lithium ion would not be the battery of the day in 2070. There will be other chemistries that are coming up. There would be a gradual transition that would happen, and it will not be one chemistry that we are going to stabilize. We are moving from, so when we started working on the EV front, I remember it was NMC 111 at that point of time, which required 33% of cobalt at in NMC 111. Now we have moved from NMC 111 to 611 to 811, which is the 10% of it. And now we are giving up with NMC chemistry also. We are moving to lithium phosphate and other chemistries. And there are solid state chemistries that are coming up. There are sodium ion chemistries that are coming up. So it's not very right to put it that we are getting enchained by some of the countries, or we are getting completely dependent on these countries for a very long period of time. Obviously, this dependence is there for a shorter or a medium term period, but for a long period of time, we are not getting into any of those. The chemistries are evolving. The technology is much ahead of this dependency that we are talking about, and we'll anyways move past that. So on the charging infrastructure point, and this is a very important concern, and I think whoever has raised it, what is happening is, in the new buildings there have been amendments to the model building bylaws that have been proposed by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and that has been aggressively adopted by a lot of states. So let me also comment states on this, because they have taken very proactive steps in building up that. Charging infrastructure for old buildings is something that we have also encountered, and we are actually constantly discussing with state departments on this. Now, this involves not only ULBs, this involves the urban department of the state, this involves the power department of the state, and different other departments that come into the picture. So the idea is, states are also in the learning phase of it. And how do we give out extra connections, and how do we make this chargeable? Can we provide charging connections in the parking bay? And they are also in the interaction. And I think at this point of time, I would like to urge industry to kindly interact with the local governments extensively. So I have seen a lot of industries and lot of players interacting with the central government, with the state governments, but I think it is very important for you to interact with the local government officials, with the local government people, to make them understand what this technology is about and how you are providing a solution to it. And if they have any challenges, I think you are the best people to solve that. So they are also in their learning curve, and they are at a very nascent stage. So I think, let me at this point of time urge all the stakeholders to interact more with the local government officials. And you keep interacting with the state government and the central government also, but interaction at the state local government is very essential. And I think, yes, this has to be solved. We are also working with different state governments, with different urban local bodies, to actually come up with solutions, to come up with scenarios. And I think we'll see a permanent solution to this soon.
Thanks, Abhishek.
Thank you.
We do have one more question we can take before I summarize and end. There's also this entire thing of energy balance in EVs. In case they use electricity that is not less polluting, so basic is to shift to renewables. I think the answer lies in what we are seeing in the last 10 years, and I think we are progressively moving towards renewables as a country, definitely. And today we stand very close to around probably 35-40% of installed capacity, and also 22 to 25% of renewable generation in the energy mix. So that's also moving towards 35% and 40% in scenarios which we have seen at least by 2030. So the grid is going green. end of it will be eventually all charging infrastructure will be green, and that's something which if needed, that also because of the technology keeps changing, and there is also that aspect of how things will move on. So but to answer the question, I think the shift to renewables is inevitable because of the economics of it, and that's what we are seeing. There is also one question on cathode active material, and the cost of it is around 45%. So does India have lithium or battery grade reserves? NITI is working on to get partnerships for the country. I think that's Abhishek, you can answer that, what we are doing on those fronts.
Sure. I have a habit of jumping to other questions. So the previous question, very interesting one, and a lot of public discourse has been trying to build around that. So even at this point of time, let me assure you, electric vehicles are 30% more clean than your internal combustion engine ones. So your grid emission factor at this point of time, which is, amount of CO2 that is generated for producing 1 unit of electricity, which is 1 kilowatt hour, that is 780. Even at that level, your electric vehicles are 30% more cleaner than your internal combustion engine ones. And remember, your internal combustion engines with time are getting dirtier. So your vehicle is getting more inefficient. It takes more amount of petrol to move the same number of kilometers. But your, from an emissions standpoint, your electric vehicles are getting more and more efficient because your grid is getting more cleaner. So for moving 1 kilometer, you're moving. So you might be emitting X amount of CO2 today, but tomorrow it will be much less than X because your grid is getting more cleaner. So that is the dynamics that we are talking about at this point of time. Your question. Sorry, I missed your question. So what was your current question?
Yeah, that's the current question is on the reserves what India has, and how are we placed to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So sorry. Yes. So around the reserves that we are talking about, see, we have for a lot of cathode material and for graphite, we have a lot of reserves in India. We are talking about manganese, we are talking about nickel, we are talking about graphite. We do have some of the reserves in India, and for others, let's say lithium and cobalt and other essential raw materials. So there is a special purpose vehicle that has been set up, which is under the name of Kabil. President of India actually made a state visit to Bolivia and to Argentina in, I think, 2018, and there were a lot of MOUs signed. The idea is, there can be two ways around it. Whether it can be a G2G contract where government interacts with governments of different countries and get the raw materials for the industry. But what we've been inclined to believe and what we've understood from the industry is that, industry is keen on getting raw materials from their end, and big conglomerates, have their contracts at a global level. So if I'm talking about X company, I'm not naming anyone, which is a battery manufacturer or a battery giant of the world. They have their global contracts with all the governments, and they know best how to negotiate that. Now, the reason for that is, government, when the governments get into some of these contracts, there is an inherent inefficiencies that come into picture, and government is not very agile in changing needs of the time. So, at this point of time, you might want a refined lithium, which is not in the lithium carbonate form. You want a lithium which is processed at the processed already, and you want that into your picture. So the idea is, we are not very let me put it this way, very efficient in understanding what different industry players want. You might have a very different requirements for the kind of lithium you want for a two-wheeler battery versus kind of lithium you want for a four-wheeler battery. And in which form do you want, whether you want it processed, whether you want it raw, whether the government is able to give that. So the understanding is that, a lot of industry body have actually joined hands, and there are a lot of industry consortiums and associations that are coming forward in this regard, and they are trying to get their contracts negotiated with different either industries of those countries, because I understand this point also. If a country is willing to give lithium to you, they won't give you unprocessed one. They want to have some value addition in their country also, and which is a fair deal. They want to generate employment as that. So that industry bodies, that industry associations and consortiums are kind of talking to their counterparts, whether in those countries, and are talking to governments also. So I think that is one of the preferred routes that we've seen that industries is looking to adopt and not go the government route in India. So, but if we have mechanisms already set up in place, and we are trying to get our mineral security in place, so that unforeseen circumstances or force majeure can be avoided.
Ashish, I'd just like to add to that over there, that
sure.
There's a lot of private investment going into mineral mining globally, right? So whether it be Canada or Chile or Australia, which are mineral rich, there's a lot of investment going in. So today, if you wanted to set up some kind of lithium refining or manganese or nickel, it's not that difficult to source raw material. There are a lot of companies that will do long-term contracts with you. The challenge remains again the processing technology and to develop something at scale so you can be cost competitive globally. So
yeah.
I think that's a whole other business, raw material investment, which today even auto companies are investing in, putting big money so that mining and mines develop in time. But it's good that the country is taking a step forward, but even private players can take step forwards to develop this industry, because it's a big opportunity, both mining and development.
Yeah, I think it's something very much into out in the open from an opportunity point of view. And one more thing which the audience has asked was also on the design part of aspects on the automobile side of thing also. Is there an opportunity for designs to come into picture based on something very innovative? So there is one person who was asked, do you think that India can provide those kinds of opportunities which are probably from the perspective of what the form and shape perspective of the EV vehicle side? And I in my opinion, it is yes. But what does the panel feel about it?
Yeah, I think definitely you look at whether an Ather product or an Ola product, I think they're world class. So I think definitely design can come out of India, engineering can come out of India, and definitely production can come out of India. Again, I just like to reiterate, you can make a great product, and you mentioned earlier that a car is actually, Abhishek mentioned that a car is more software than actual metal and aluminum manufacturing. So if you look at a two-wheeler, which is less, say, metal in it,
yeah.
40 to 45% cost is your cell. So today at 1 lakh or 1,50,000, adoption is not happening at the rate we would want it to happen. So the question is, can you make a 75,000 rupee product for the Indian market, right? And can you make a great product like the companies in India making for that price point, what the Indian consumer expects? So that is a real challenge, and someone needs to bet big. Maybe it's Ola, maybe it's someone else. Someone needs to bet big and capture the whole value chain to reach that cost structure and have a successful product. I have no doubt that somebody will do it sooner or later, but someone has to reach that price point where the Indian consumer goes towards it. Like what's happened in aviation, a 5,000 rupee ticket, everybody will fly. Why will they take a train? Same way, if you can have this product at 65, 75,000 and a good product, why will people go for an ICE scooter? They would rather go for an EV scooter.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think we are reaching the, we've already crossed 4 minutes, and it was a pleasure to have every one of you from the panel, speaking about several of the discrete points required to enable this ecosystem going forward. And I would specifically thank Abhishek to have taken most of the questions, and having been from the bringing in the perspectives from the government. And I think from every point of view, we are in a very exciting place. Of course, as a summary, it comes out that we are not at the inflection point. I think we are reaching the inflection point. Certainly, some of the segments will need to come out very clearly for India, and some of these business models as well as financing models need to be very different that the world has seen for India. So I think from that perspective, the policies and also the ecosystem development needs to be also tweaked. When we are seeing this much of variations from what is happening elsewhere and what's happening in India, I think on the development and also that needs a tweak, and it needs to bring in all the relevant stakeholders and states and cities to act upon in unison to bring this revolution forward. At the same time, bringing in policies which can give renewable energy directly to the manufacturers without any the third party sale option. That's also something, so that you build in sustainability at all quarters, not just in the end use segments. So I think with this summary, I would like to end this panel, and over to you, Siddharth, for the conclusion part of it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Such an insightful and engaging conversation, and an absolute privilege to hear you all, and very well moderated, Mr. Kulkarni. Our leaders and I have been hooked till the end, and we've taken home several nuggets from today's conversation. I'm still receiving messages from our members as we speak, and I really wish we had more time. And also thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining in large numbers, and for always staying till the end, and for sharing excellent questions. For the questions that may not have been addressed due to paucity of time, while most of it was covered, I will still share the relevant ones with the leaders on the panel and request some of their time for it. We will also try to post the answers in the community app as well. So along with our weekly webinar series and our publication, we're taking these discussions and conversations live onto the exclusive community app, which is curated for senior leaders across 6 sectors that are e-mobility, energy, logistics, healthcare, real estate, and aerospace and defense. Also happy to share that we're adding more new features, more in-app features as well, and also 18 new sector communities which will have synergistic diversifications with each other to help and support the ecosystem to grow further. So whether you would like to engage with us on our platform, leaders are invited to join. So thank you very much, sirs, once again. We look forward to having more such discussions in the future, and please do stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for having us here. Bye.